He said he's on an important call, so I hope that we are just as important as that call and that he'll join us shortly. Generally, the show is structured that Dean and I would reason for about half an hour, and then we open the mic for the other participants. And then the following week we would invite a guest. So because the conversation was juicy last week and I'm looking for the lead conversationalist, I don't see him here yet. Breda David Gibson, if anybody got a number, link and make you know, we change the structure for make we engage in this conversation or he introduced he needs to get in this room. And I did communicate with him since the last show, since the last reasoning last Thursday night. And we agreed that tonight we'll focus on the role of labor in the economic history of Belize. Good night, Cynthia Pitts, Musile, I see you're here. I'm expecting other people to join us. And they're not here yet. So as we get ready for Breda Gibson, because from the discussion that we had, when we're talking about the formation of Belize as a country, and we talk about the labor, most naturally the conversation would go to the enslavement of African people. And so that's where I know the conversation will be rooted tonight. I just wanted to make sure that we give our ancestors the respect they're due, because the story of African people, who are the first human beings to work in Belize and not be paid for their labor, the enslavers capitalized on that, built their wealth, that we recognize that our ancestors, prior to being enslaved, contributed to a world civilization, and that's at least 6,000 years ago. So we're talking about 8,000 years ago, and the enslavement of our people was over 400 years. So just to ensure that we root this conversation in a more accurate timeline, because it's unfair to only focus the conversation on the enslavement of African people when we talk about workers in Belize or the role of labor in Belize. So that was extremely important. I had sent reading material. I spoke to someone today and I was unable to find that book. I see Sister Tricia already posted the YouTube link. So as soon as I get a chance, I'll go ahead and share that information. So the book is called The Economic History of Belize, that I made a recommendation for people to just read a synopsis of it. It says the economic history of Belize from the 17th century to post-independence, Barbara Bulmer Thomas and Victor Bulmer Thomas. Good night, Breda Gibson.
Hello. How are you doing?
Michael Lee, while Breda Dean said he may be late joining us, and so I'll just read a few, just a little bit about this book. It's one of the books that's a good resource book when we're talking about the role of labor in Belize's, in the economic history of Belize. And it says, well, I was supposed to get a book. One of the things that it said in here, it talked about, I guess, if I remember correctly, because I wasn't able to find my book. Are you familiar with this book, Brother Gibson?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I had done when it was first published by Kubola, I had done the, what they called it, the launch back in 2016. And what I can say about it is that it is the first economic analysis of the various modes of production that were employed in this area since the advent of the Europeans.
Why do you think so? Why do you, aren't they Europeans who wrote the book?
Yes.
Why do you think it took so long with all the Belizeans who went away and studied and came back with
Well,
specialization. Why do you
well,
think
you
it's
know, if you look at, for example, the excellent work done by Walter Rodney, who did this how Europe underdeveloped Africa.
yes.
Um, it was something that was painstakingly done by him. What Bulma Thomas explains in his preface, is that at the time, whilst there was some economic analysis being done, and you see some of that through Boland, and you see some of it through what he has relied upon is actually previous work done by other people, not necessarily economists. What has facilitated this was the ability to access online information, the vast database available through the British Library, the National Archives, our archives, and so on. The whole research landscape has changed because of digital access. Research has been made so much easier. The compilation of the data was being done in various places, some in Belize, some in the UK, and so on. It's a whole repetition of the difficulty that it has taken to amass data, both in diplomatic history terms, economic history terms. So it's that it has been done by a European, doesn't matter for me who does it. The question is whether what is being produced. I remind you, you're dealing with somebody who has had a long-standing interest in Belize, who is married to a Belizean. His wife actually wrote a part of the book relating to the the botanical gardens in Belize and the purpose of those botanical gardens, which formed a part of what would have been agricultural diversification away from the tight control of the aristocracy. So from that perspective, you can see, as a matter of fact, when you look at the book, you will see that it's divided up into 4 or 5 components, looking at particular periods where up to 1838, the principal mode of production was the use of slave labor. There was an initial use of Mayan labor by the early settlers, Maya slaves, and that didn't last long because the Mayas moved away. And by 1820, there was some law which was saying no more use of Maya. You have black slaves, you use them. You move into the period, which would have been the period of the logwood extraction, which eventually went into mahogany. And then you see the period up to 1763, when there was this first Treaty of Paris that gives some legitimacy or recognition by Spain to what these people were doing, the extraction of logwood. Then you see the transition to mahogany and the formation of what was identified as the Belize settlement, the British settlement in the Bay of Honduras, which later transited into a colony, then a crown colony. But in all of these periods, the dominant economic elite, or these timber barons, if you want to call them that, and a mercantile crowd, because there's also a mercantile dimension in terms of the link between Belize and Jamaican and the Nicaraguan or the Central American coast. So essentially there was, the reliance was on slave labor up until 1838 and thereafter, which is important for understanding what is happening now, is that the whole concept of a labor surplus economy, there was always more labor that they generated that so that they knew that they could have a reliable supply of labor to do forestry, preventing any significant moving away into other related activities or agricultural activities. That was a deliberate strategy to maintain a source of labor for forest activity. What happened after 1854, when the Confederates came into the South, and when there was a move towards or beyond the Siboon River down, when they really started getting into the forest lands there, there became a need for other sources of labor. in the post-emancipation situation, which then led to the importation of Indians, indentured people from India.
Second, brother, I want to ask you about stick and pin because I never expect for getting to the meat item. Breda Dean just joined us. Yeah. With him not coming in on time because he had another call to take, I said, well, I don't want us me got to make something engage you.
Well, you asked me a question and I expanded on it a bit.
No problem, brother. Good night, Breda Dean.
Good night, Sister Yaya. Good night, everybody. Breda Gibson. I was glued just now, Sister Pitts and Sister Stephanie, Brother Tit. Blessed Thursday to everybody, Sister Yaya. How you doing?
I am good. I listened to but the thing what they told me after is I can't find my book, right? And so I listened to Breda Gibson and I say, watch this. I want a conversation flow, you know, but I have to stop my brother because I don't accept everything. In fact, I know everything what he said. I know so line, hook, and sinker. So it really matter. I think that a valuable resource. I
tell you what they're in the book, really. I could give you an interpretation of that, but I see a lot of relevance of what is being put out there. What I would say is that, look, I suggest that if it's not been read, the time should be taken to read it and understand where it's coming from. The Economic History of Belize by Victor Bulmer Thomas and Barbara, his wife, Barbara Bulmer Thomas. And it's looking at various economic periods and the political economy. In other words, the economy and the political economy. Who was driving things? What was driving things? Who constituted? What was the mode of production? That is a specific term. What is the mode of production? Who provided labor to produce what was being produced? So whatever you have seen as not accurate and so on, that comes from reading the book, not from what I've said.
I'm questioning the accuracy of the book, you know. That never that time in the talk about.
You're questioning the accuracy of what I'm saying.
No. I've read the book, but because I don't have the book in front of me, because I write up in my book and I put my question mark. And I know any book I read, I question who are the authors, what training they have, where they come from, what that for that, because that bleeds into the book, because that's human nature. So if I write one book and I train in the economic history of Belize, trust and believe it, and totally different from the kind of conscious African woman and my ancestors at the top boat. So it's for us to keep those, that's a part of critical thinking. So it's and not just what they say, if you do other readings, you do that comparison, you know. So I find it to be a valuable source book. So one of the things that's different is they talk about how Belize got its name. And don't forget who I give mad respect to when it comes to research for African people of Belize. There's a territory on the continent of Africa named Belize.
Belize,
But I don't know name variation named Belize.
No, I know that.
But with all the research you here, you don't hear nobody else come up with it other than the continental African Monday.
Actually, there's a man by the name of David Ruiz who debunked the two things, the two sources. But he didn't. You also mentioned the Belize in, I think it must in West Africa, must be somewhere in Nigeria. It's a community.
What I
would say, I don't think it's good to look at these things because he tried to present this as the authoritative thing, that he has conclusively found that the word Belize has a Maya origin. That is a debate by itself. I could go on forever. I don't think that's our purpose. I think our purpose is to, as I understand it, as had been suggested, is look at the role of labor in the economic history of Belize.
I agree. My point was simply that prior to us getting into the meat of this conversation, is for us to bear in mind, for us to think critically. And that's what makes, that's the difference. We're not just here to do a book review and for hear our own voice because we know what we know. But that's the point, is the new information has come forward. You bring that to the conversation. And indeed, when we're talking about the labor force, we're talking about human beings who were enslaved. So that we African ancestors we talk about primarily, and when we're looking at 2021, what's going on with black people and labor as it relates to the people who are most marginalized.
Yeah.
It's a legacy of, it's a continuum that our kidnapping, torture, enslavement, colonialism, neocolonialism. It's a continuum, in a stop. The methodology change, but yeah, I just want to ground the conversation in that. It's 7:16. So have you read that book, Dean?
No, Sister Yaya. I don't have.
I was going to recommend that you circulate it because I sent it electronically.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and it's can be sent.
I didn't see your email, brother.
Really? You gave me an address.
We are talking about it.
Your roots 253 at Gmail.
At gmail.com.
Right, that's what I sent it to.
Yeah. So
I also sent out some other material because there's quite a bit of, for example, there's something about the Africanization of Amerindians, which looks specifically at Mosquito Coast and the Colombian coast and the impact of Africans on those populations. You know, just to cite one. But anyway, I can resend it. But I would strongly recommend that it's looked at because outlining how the economic system evolved up to this point in time where we still have a labor surplus economy, and instead of going for indentured Indians as they did at the time, we are going to Honduras and Guatemala to exploit these cheap labor sources, and in the process suppressing the national working class and its ability to organize, because notwithstanding a Ministry of Labor and ILO conventions and so on, these people do not want organized labor to have any kind of excessive influence on decision making. And we are seeing that every day. And I think the CW case is a classic example of that. So I think that's what you get out of a text like that. Look for the realities. It's based on primary data. It's based on archival material. It's based on the writings of notable academics and so on. And they have put it out there in such a way as to make it easily readable and analyzed. So that's why I thought it was an important thing to look at. The thing about Belize and so on, I mean, these are for me like distractions.
One second, I don't know if somebody have on a mic and they have one doggy. 1 second, brother Mason. Somebody have on a mic and they hear one doggy in the background.
It's Sister Stephanie.
Unfortunately, it's my neighbor's dog, and
okay, go ahead.
I'm one step away from using some.
Okay.
Anyway, I don't want to comment on that. I better mute it, I'll stop talking.
I can't avoid it. Go ahead.
No, you're right. I'll stop talking.
Oh no, this is the party of a talk. No. So I don't know if anybody, because other people were here from last week. Breda Gibson, I guess he got a mic. This is our conversation for all the way. So if anybody at this point want continue the conversation, we probably left hastily last week. Maybe I sent a book review, so people who may not have read the book could just do a quick book review if they wanted to do a search on it before tonight's meeting. If they want to add anything, if there was any question you wanted answer tonight, participants, the microphone. Well, the participants didn't say nothing. I don't know. Talking has never been an issue for us. So, Breda Gibson, Dean, you ever had no pressing question?
No, yeah, because unfortunately for me, like I said, I haven't I read for the most part the part of the review that was done by Mr. Usher, but that is as far as it goes as in terms of the book. So I definitely look forward to perhaps you're sharing it, or Breda Gibson sharing it with Brother Tate, so that then we can then have a good read on it now and see, look at the perspective of
Let me ask, Brother Gibson, why should Belizeans, because like really, most people not read like maybe the generation before mine. People not read, pick up no buy no book and read like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So why should believe? I would address because I really want everybody to participate in the conversation as much as possible.
Yeah.
Why should Belizeans care about the role of labor in the economic history of Belize? Why?
Mhm. Why should religions care about reading
The
history?
role of labor in the economic history of Belize.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Well,
sounds like a rather dead
it has to do with the
conversation.
whole matter of the importance of history. Bear in mind that our institutions suppress knowledge of history or knowledge of history that is relevant, accurate, and not influenced, or what you would call historiography, which is influenced by perspectives, as we have had in terms of the European influence and the colonial influence on our perspectives that has politically socialized us. Your good friend, Nigel Encolada, was in a
Stop the
discussion.
press. Stop the press. No, you know better.
I just a
But I
teaser,
want
man.
to tell you something about me. Anywhere you invite Yaya Marin Coleman and show. Yes,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
man that my brother, but me and a man are no good friend. Don't put that out there like that.
No, I said that, and I thought I put enough, what do you call it, of a twist in it to say that perhaps he's not your good friend. But the
All
important
right,
thing
go
is
ahead.
that
I'm a brother.
as part of this whole process of their developing the what they did for Emancipation Day, they had a discussion, and I don't know if you've seen it with people who do history at UB. It's called Let's Talk Emancipation. Have you seen that?
You know, I don't tell you already. I don't watch it, and I have no intention for watching right now because I got one bone in my throat with niche and niche management for years, especially this year.
All right.
Anything you tell a private liberal, me could tell a public because me the talk.
Yeah. All right. Well, I respect that, but I'm just saying that one of the things that came out from one of the university lecturers was the fact that it is only now that it seems that there's some effort being made to really put the Black history and Maya history agenda and curriculum at all levels of education. But then when they did a census of who is teaching history right now and how is history being taught, obviously I think it's a side issue. You have to pass that if you want your credits kind of thing. And it's not something that really focuses on bringing home the reality of what the political and experience has been of our society. History is not an overnight subject. It is something that you read over a period of time. My one experience in studying history is that I could have tell you about Bannockburn, and I could have tell you about the European wars. I could tell you about the War of American Independence. I could have tell you everything except what happened in Belize, except something called a brief sketch, which wasn't saying anything much. I could recall waving the Union Jack in a parade and saying we are British, yes we are, because that is how we were socialized. You have to break loose of that mentally and realize where that was coming. And for many of us, we did. You know, for many of us, you can't move the queen off of the dollar right now because that has a certain significance. But what I'm saying is that it was not until later on that you had a thing called West Indian history. I started to read on Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery, that you realize that, hey, something happened here that rooted and ripped people out of a place as part of a certain system of production.
When was West Indian history told? Because even now in 2021, there's no African and Maya history being taught except at SJC. So we have a talk.
No, I tell you when I'm going to high school, that was between 1965 and 1969.
Okay. Yeah.
50 years ago. But at the University of West Indies, they had a program that was starting because you had a group of intellectuals and academics who were coming and said, hey, let's turn this upside down because this is nonsense. And that is when you had the first wave of powerful intellectuals coming out of UWI, like George Beckford, who wrote Persistent Poverty, who was succeeded by people like Michael Witter, Small Garden, Bitter Weed. They started looking at the reality of Caribbean societies in a post-colonial stage, and the whole fallacy of economic development when in fact it was still part of that system of exploitation that faces, the names hadn't changed in terms of who ruled the society and so on. And so coming back to the role of history and the role of economic history, I think that of understanding what, in other words, what people are doing. You hear about battles and so on, but why were wars being fought? And usually at the root of it had some economic, imperialist, expansionist, exploitative underlying rationale. This machine that came out of Europe with technology and everything that colonized and colonized over a period of time, starting small and getting bigger and bigger. India, Africa, Caribbean, and the importance of the Caribbean at the time in terms of what it was putting into Europe is all things that we need to understand to get a better grasp of what I see as necessary political action now. Is this going to be more of the same to support a system that perpetuates persistent poverty, aggravated now by COVID? So to answer the question, the role of labor in the economic history of Belize, that whatever we see around us is the product of labor. Whatever you see in terms of grandeur, so-called grandeur of Europe, is the product of labor, of slave labor, of exploitation of labor. With that kind of fundamental analysis or analytical framework, you use that analytical framework to understand the dynamics of what is going on now. That in fact, what is called business in a capitalist system is something that derives a surplus. They call it profit. That is, profit is, everybody's got to make that profit and so on. But it finally has to do with the exploitation of labor and the surplus generated by labor, which is given this neat name called profit. What comes back to the worker, it is only through the work of the unionists and those resistance fighters, if you want to, going right, and that's why the book is important again, because it goes into a period of looking at Antonio Soberanes. These are people who, here in Belize, in a world where there's a big thing happening between the capitalist world and this variation of the socialist theme called the Soviet Union, because they're not truly socialists, they were totalitarian, and there's a reason why that happened. All of these things fit into understanding why here, the emergence of the trade union movement, a direct response to increasing capitalist exploitation. Although there was diversification away from just forestry to get more into agriculture, what kind of agriculture are we talking about? A European demand for bananas, European demand for citrus. And as in the case of there's a comparison, an interesting comparison between Belize Estate Company and United Fruit Company. These are companies that own hundreds of thousands of acres, exploiting them and exploiting labor and making sure that labor could not organize beyond that. So there's been a continuous suppression of labor going right back to the post, meaning in terms of labor organization. And in the post-emancipation period, structured things done by legislative councils and so on to ensure access to land was prevented because you could only own a certain acreage and anything of a certain size. So if you are a small man, can't own big land. That was something that always militated against black man in Belize getting into agriculture in a big way. And the penetration from the north of the people coming in, you had a new set of elites coming in from the north during the caste wars. I'm kind of rambling, but I'm just saying that when you get into this book, you get a sort of comprehensive and tight view of how the thing progressed or developed or evolved over a period of time to understand the reality now. And now I think is the time to really do an analysis as a basis for any further labor organization that goes beyond the narrow unionistic type of activity, which doesn't understand that what's happening in the society is because of the nature of the society, and that it is the requirement of labor to deal with that in a way that does the necessary adjustments to ensure that this surplus that is being generated, something more substantial has got to happen for labor. And the only way that could happen is that labor becomes a political force for itself, meaning this thing about PUP and UDP is highly divisive. PUP itself, supposing to be the party of the Nationalist Party itself and the party of social justice, itself set out to destroy the labor movement. It fragmented it. It did it more than once. The labor organization, the same Christian Workers Union that you see now, is a diluted version of what happened, what was happening in the 1950s, because all the revolutionaries, if you want to call them that, the Betsons and so on, who provide the infrastructure for political advancement of the PUP, were eventually suppressed. They did it once, and they did it again in the 80s when the General Workers Development Union started getting strong and becoming what was the genesis of the National Trade Union Congress of Belize. The GDWU was one of the most progressive entities around in terms of labor organization and mobilizing real fast, and it got mashed up by the government of George Price. So that's reality. That's speak for right now. Cynthia, but if I quickly, I know I see that Cynthia, is she with us?
Yes, but I open the mic and I ask the participants if they want to participate. Nobody don't answer. I wait.
And I'm here to call the mic. Sorry about that.
So if they don't say nothing, then I can only think they don't want to say nothing. And so you have to allow people to talk when and if they want to talk. So the mic that for anybody who want to talk when they want to talk. Breda Gibson. Some of the narrative, some of the things we share are like the general narrative we usually hear, like the national narrative. But when you read additionally, there's so much more meat to that, especially where women organizers are concerned.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly as the national narrative, but anyway, I just to balance it out because
no, it's very important because indeed, one of the things and one of the other I don't know how to describe them, but Rolando Cocom said a very interesting thing in this thing that I call, that is called Let's Talk Emancipation, because the question was put to him directly, what happened with women? What was the role of women over that period of time? And he was able to say a few things, which is why I recommend that you look at it, that he understood that there was a traditional role for women. And who
was it that was given the traditional role of women? Who am I the speaker? The talk about the traditional role of women. Who was it?
I mentioned Rolando Cocom. You mustn't react to years of people, man. You look on whether
I know, listen to me. I know the brother, but this is what I want to hear, especially the brother. When you're talking about, and this is like, you can't use one colonized mind to solve European problem. I don't black woman. Most of the women doing that time were black women.
Yes.
Like anybody could talk about, and that's what I'm talking about. Oftentimes it's men talking on behalf of women or interpreting history. And I'm saying
this is why I say it's important, not important, but I thought you should take a look at it, because how he was responded to was precisely along the lines that you're saying. Who is he? What do you understand of it? Who has really studied this? Who understands it? And I have to say that in the course of the presentation and the discussion, your name was mentioned. And it was interesting that the comment that Nigel made was, well, we don't have to see eye to eye kind of thing, but sees you as a comrade. I don't know if you know that. I almost wanted to encourage him to do that.
I tell you, say the man, my brother. You think I say it lightly when I tell her that?
All right, good. So that sounds dynamic. That sounds dynamic. That does sound like you're lucky into a thing. Well, I'm just saying that.
People, then my gel, my brother. I'm not happy thing. I'm not the part of the day right now. That doesn't stop me from
critical appraisal is necessary. If you see things going in a direction and you have an analysis of it, then obviously nothing is locked in. Everything is for questioning. You have to do it. There's got to be a critical approach, otherwise you stumble. And everything has got to be looked at critically, and not just rhetoric. That's a
in talking about the role of women, because that's one of my questions in having this conversation tonight. At the point where, let's say, coming out of when there was a split with the Antonio Soberanis and his crew, because there was a split, right? They came up with a level of consciousness and they challenged the colonial state to the point where one 10th of September they had their one parade with hundreds of people. You know, he had a narrative there, though, right? So I'm saying at that point, is eventually they mashed me up. But my concern is that we're in the position we're in because we don't have leaders with that level of awareness or thinking. They really think that we could use a system that wasn't designed for us to be equal, and think if you patchwork it, it won't get equal. And seem either not having the courage or the knowledge to think of something new and different. It may be risky. It may not work the first time, but for keep going along the same road and the patch it, what there are 2 cents for that? The direction where we going 40 years. We can't figure it out yet, brother?
Sorry?
40 years.
Yeah. Well, just 40 years after independence and so on. What I see is some dynamics. If you want to look at it from a scientific socialist perspective, if you want to call it that, because from that perspective, you're looking at how the society is evolving. Where is the society in the larger capitalist or international capitalist system? This thing I really have foreign direct investment, when inviting the capitalists to exploit you, and they do it and they repatriate. And somebody said, why measure that in a GDP and so on. All I'm saying in this context is that these things have got to be understood for what they are. And where leadership comes from is from understanding that dynamic and how to organize around dealing with the reality of a state in capitalist society, which is supposed to defend capitalists, not defend labor. Not to defend labor. Although, and that's, if you want to look everyday examples, I say most are to lash the labor department, they take a whole year to come up with something. Why is that lackadaisical attitude? Because they don't give a good goddamn. They don't. You have conventions of ILO and all of that, but they don't want to deal with anything that appears radical, out of line, that is questioning very incisively where these agreements come from and why they were concocted, and why is the information coming. It means that you have to know who are the leaders and who are the people of the future who can take care of labor's interests. Not many persons who fall into that category. And bear in mind that the whole orientation of trade unions is for assimilation into the capitalist system. Some of them are so anti. If you looked at it, the United States, UAW, or any one of them, where so-called progressives in America are so sidelined, they don't get no space. But then they recognize the democratic socialists in America, for example, who link up with Maduro the other day for understand where they go on and then feed back into the Democrats' party because the Democrats can't kick them out. But how effective and influential are they? Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders and them. Who are the people in Belize who have that kind of perspective? Who think anything about it? Because I Belize.
Who was it that you were saying didn't want to be radical? The current union leaders?
I don't say that they don't want to be radical. I'm just saying it's the orientation, the political socialization is so critical. If you live in a capitalist society, the ideas of that society or any society will be the ideas of those who control the society. And that integrates the church as an integral part of that system of socialization. Big role, church, school system, and so on. Big role. What is being taught, it's better not to teach history. And the real thing, because that is too radicalizing an ingredient in the development of the consciousness of the people. So there's a serious suppression that is going on, and that is perpetuating itself. I look at the University of Belize. I tried to come up, I was asked to prepare something, it got funding, a public policy research institute. It developed it, I did it in collaboration with the Salises people in Jamaica, very good people. And it got mashed up. We got some funding for it. It got mashed up. Why? Because one of the things that we have been doing is research and also teaching something called political science and political economy. The only place that was being taught at the University of Belize was in the history department by a man named Andaye Iyo. I knew that because I was teaching a course in that department relating to the history of Belize Guatemala relations.
Brother, when you have a national university, they're not even accredited. What would you talk about? Look here.
Well,
come on, man. Join this conversation. Only me and the brother have up the mic.
No, but you see, this thing about accreditation is a question of who is recognizing your degrees. Now, obviously, there's so much more to be done. But a lot of that also has to do with suppression by competing regional institutions. You know what? Give nobody no space. I'm not going to say anything more about that, but when you look at that, you have to look at now what is going on. Is there anything that will deal with that so that when your graduates come out of wherever, or whichever program, and want to go on, they can get into any institutions out there. It is something to be worked upon. Is that happening? Is there any systematic thing that's happening to deal with that accreditation program? But that's sideline, another area requiring focus. What I'm saying is that when it comes to building consciousness, building leadership, there's nothing in place that helps nurture that. So anybody could jump up and say they want to be a politician. Lord Jesus, what you're seeing right now is like some of the most primitive understanding of what is governance. Well, some of the things that you see happening right now tells you directly. Power is one thing, knowledge of government is one thing, knowledge of governance is another thing, and there is a paucity, dearth, lack of knowledge that is generally pushing things. And in that context, you have the people who are constitutional, who in terms of studying law, study constitutional law. So you would think that there's a certain understanding of what law, or what constitutional law is and what constitutions are and how they're supposed to work and so on. And I don't see that connection, which tells me that the dynamic of the situation is a power-driven dynamic. Yeah, you're gone.
So thanks for that, Brother Gibson. One of the things that I'm thinking about is with reference to the topic tonight. I'm here reflecting on I believe back in the 1800s that you spoke about in terms of the labor movement being powerful, and then the then PUP becoming more powerful and pushing them aside. And as we look at what's happening today, one thing remains: labor continues to be an important factor, not only in production, but in all economic activities. Everything starts with labor and ends with labor. Yeah. Right? So you need labor to produce, and as a result of labor having resources, then you could consume, and economic activities is driven. But yet, labor continues to be the most abused factor in that equation. And last week you said that labor need to take a different approach, and labor need to start take one political approach, because clearly when we look at things from, I guess if you look at things just simple, we understand the importance of labor, but labor does not understand the importance of itself. And so you spoke about, well, perhaps labor need to take one political approach. And I want to go along that line, because you said you're not speaking specifically party politics. Earlier this week, I believe it was, there was some stir on the radio whereby Gilroy Usher spoke about Black people needing to organize themselves. And I'm not quite sure if it's in line with your comment last week about labor need to organize itself politically. I would like for you to expound a little bit on that comment.
I don't know what is his philosophy, and I heard what he said, but certainly it's that is again like you could saying to me, look, there's a need for greater unity, greater level of organization amongst Black people to agitate for certain things. The problem of the city, where obviously certain things need to be put in place that is supportive of some transformation that is coming from the roots, that has the participation and so on. It's not happening. We see various efforts being made. We've heard of a string of entities and enterprises, CYDP and Youth with the Future, and each of them lopsided in terms of who's involved. One party come in and mash up what happened before. Nothing good to be inherited from it. So that's a kind of divisiveness when it comes to mobilization of the city in a way that deals with the problems of poverty and joblessness and so on. It needs more than is being offered and has been offered and put out there before. And it has suppressed what has come from certain areas, like something called UEF, which seem to be too radical. They want to associate with a UEF because it's a mobilizational, a radical mobilization organization. It has to be radical because if it's not radical, and what do you mean by radical? You don't mean violent, and so it means new thinking that moves away from a norm that has not served, that has helped to perpetuate a condition that needs to change and will not change unless new ideas enter. Now, when it comes to political force, what I mean is transcending party politics, is looking at a broad spectrum of issues in the broad way that they need to be looked at and being addressed in that way. And when I see the division of labor, it's a political division of labor. Apart from the economic division of labor, there's a political division of labor between political parties. And it has been exploited. And the history of the PUP has been, and it's not unique to Belize, but labor has been used as a jumpstart for political parties. That's the history of the pre-independence and post-colonial parties, that labor became the force behind the nationalist movement. The nationalist movement is essentially a labor movement that then incorporated other classes and economic elites, bearing in mind that you also have a system that is supposed to be democratizing itself through the universal ballots and universal suffrage and so on. And so you need to capture that force to help you get power. But when you get the power, the structure is such that that power is for you to continue or to enhance your capitalist enterprise, and saying that essentially you're hearing it today, everybody could win, everybody could win. That's what you're hearing today. That's, I think, just another manifestation of it. Everybody can win because that is not how the system is designed. So the non-party political is something which is saying, look, let us nurture our leaders, let us build a consciousness amongst progressive labor persons who have the good analysis of where this, why this exists, what exists, and how this can be dealt with. And it's not saying revolutionize it in the sense, in that narrow sense, that it is like, oh, you go to the barricades and you go to the guns and so on. That is an extreme situation. I think there's enough space for that transformation to be done through the strength of an organized labor organization. And I think you have the rudiments of it in the form of the National Trade Union Congress. Bear in mind that a lot of these unions are already penetrated. I mean, I look at the sugar workers, the Belize Workers Union. Every time somebody becomes an activist or a militant or so on, they get pulled up into the managerial group, and that excludes them from participation in the organizing of they did it the other day at BTL. The BTL people were up in arms that the chief person was co-opted because before that there was some collaboration that happened that workers weren't pleased with at BTL, and he became the advocate. I think he now has a managerial position, so he's immediately shut up. I won't mention his name. You probably know better than we do because these are people who are in the NTCB. But I'm not saying that there's got to be a political awareness and a political consciousness and an idea of strategy built around a knowledge of the history of where this is coming from, bearing in mind that it is not unique to our particular society, but it is the standard mode for all of these post-colonial societies, some of them who have tried to go on a socialist track have been immediately suppressed. That kind of explains why Cuba has got to continue to be suppressed. Although there's a need for their own changes internally and so on, that's their sovereign right to do. But the reason for the suppression of Cuba is because, and the reason for the suppression of Venezuela, and the reason why they've had successes, although I see Evo Morales was able to fight back the OAS and his RSA is now in, they fought back. And all of these are progressive people who are looking critically at their political economy and saying, this has to change. This model not work. And we know what is the solution. And that is the solution that they found. It's a long history. Nicaragua, Guatemala, all these places have been through that experience, and it's an experience that repeats itself. The Grenada experience, for example, is the first of a kind in the so-called Commonwealth Caribbean. To be there was to see some dynamics at the time which tells you that there's a certain level of consciousness of leadership and strategy and so on. What mashed it up? Ego, Bernard Cord. So, you know, it's saying what are the pitfalls that you need to look for. Sometimes it's just ego that mashes things up. Even at an early stage, I see that happening to some of our third parties, that they're too much, everybody has their own idea, there's no synthesis, there's no keep your eye on the prize and build a strategy towards it. It does happen, and that's why they're weak. I think that labor has an infrastructure already that can be built upon, but built upon in such a way that it is, whoever is building it cannot be penetrated, because that is the first thing that will happen. And I think you know that. And it will happen to you. They will try to penetrate you and co-opt you and so on if you get too strong.
But when we look at that penetration, though, Brother Gibson, and yes, it has occurred throughout history. But I still ask the question, yes, you may have dynamic leaders, and you might have very extraordinary leaders, but that still should not take away from the responsibility that the rest of the membership should ensure that, look, if your leader is penetrated or if your leader dies, the organization can deal with it and the organization can go dormant. So there is still I still believe that history is sure with that. I don't know if it has to do with succession planning or not making everybody understand their role in this struggle, that it's not only your leader. So even if your leader get penetrated under no circumstances, I could understand that one leader I could understand a leader suppressing an organization. So you have one, and I'll use this word not in a disrespectful manner, but fine, you have a lame duck leader who by the house the bond down, what we do and nothing gets done. I could understand that because his role as the leader that to ensure that he suppresses the organization. And that might be equivalent of him being penetrated. But I'm saying that they always say the power is in the base.
Yes, absolutely.
So I still think that membership across these organizations need to understand that the power is always in the base. Now, let me just throw this out there. You spoke about unions participating or taking that political approach, but not party politics approach. But there is also a conversation happening amongst labor that perhaps we should take a party politics approach. Your comments on that?
No, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was looking at it from how to build towards it. And I think some of what has happened, and we shouldn't dismiss what has happened in the past in 2005 or 2016, because these are all indicators of a certain level of preparedness to address issues of governance in particular, and corruption and so on. Bear in mind that historically, some of them still have the name Jamaica Labour Party, which is the most reactionary conservative link to the Republican Party than a Labour Party. In St. Lucia, the United Workers' Party, which was the party that, looking at the parties that were part of the independence process. In St. Lucia, you also have a United Workers' Party, which is led by people who I think are progressives, Kenny Anthony, and he's not the leader anymore, but they have a perspective of worker representation, not as part of any broad class participatory thing, but something that is specifically worker focused. And certainly it's, when I am dismissive of party politics as it exists, but if there is the objective conditions that enable a workers' party to form in Belize, then it should be pursued. But in the meantime, it's a question of what are the stepping stones. You could form a party, or it's a question of what's at the base. If the membership is not of that view or of that consciousness and of that analysis of why it is necessary, then it says that there's a need for serious political education based on a knowledge of history, which links right up to now as to make it fully understood why this economic model is not designed to sustain or to advance workers or the poor or the Black people, because there's a coincidence of Black and workers, and it has always been that way. In a situation where, of course, the demographic is changing, but it is the same exploitative thing that is happening. I made the instant reference to what has happened with the bringing in of the Honduran and Guatemalan workers in citrus and bananas and so on. And interestingly, like you see, a high school opened up the other day in the South. People in Europe saw what was happening with banana workers, saw the suppression, because the crowd, I think somebody had to pay some money for threatening certain union organizers. They have to pay money for that, because they've always tried to suppress labor, or labor organizations. No unions are wanted. And so you look at the role of the Labor Department, or Ministry of Labor, and they are part and parcel of that suppression. Always sanctimoniously quoting the ILO conventions for this and the other. But what about the constitutional right of workers to work in a situation where, as far as public workers go, it's happening politically, it continues to happen, and it doesn't stop. So coming back to what needs to be done, yes, how are the political objectives to be defined? Where you really want to go? And it has to start with some creating of a consciousness in terms of the roots, and in terms of the respective organizations, and it has to go beyond the organizations. Where does worker education occur, and how can it be effectively done? Bearing in mind that it's a major work, the numbers are small, and so you have to move very strategically. We have to move, which will give political force, how you build momentum quickly. All of these are things that need to be studied to really come up with what would be a strategy or an approach. Always feeding back into analyzing what is going on in the society. That's so important. So you need your own analytical capacity to understand the dynamics of the world. So think there's an infrastructure that exists. I see the NTUCB as offering itself as the best vehicle through which to do that. And one has to quickly understand whether, in fact, that is so, or whether there's a need for some standalone or LinkedIn, standalone, something which starts looking at how to do worker education in a way that is transformative. Saying, look, here's something that is historical, that is an economic model that has relevance as a colonial system of exploitation that transited into a capitalist model of exploitation, and it continues. And it's still a labor surplus economy where labor is sitting around. They tap into who they want and who they don't want, and that is how control is exercised.
Yeah.
So we have to go to America and wherever we're going and so on to find work. It's more so the case right now. It hasn't changed. The product might have changed, Paris again, the agriculture and certain types of agriculture. And then they also have to look at large scale agriculture and what it does. It's mechanized. So is that the road that we are going to have to go down? You will see economic growth. You will see GDP. There's a big concern about GDP, but you will not see that making an impact on the condition of poverty. It's trickle down. And these guys is always
After it.
Oh,
yes.
See, you guys this.
Yeah.
Ownership. One thing about me, I want to say,
yeah.
I definitely. I know that we really wanted more people to participate. People chose to listen, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I know me. I make you just stand up and talk all night and hold the mic, cause I know I'm monologue this. So I want to engage you.
I've been responding to questions.
Yes, I appreciate it. But you just said I'm me cause it. I said not me cause it.
No, you cause it.
I want like the match.
You trigger it for something European, and European write the book and so on.
It didn't matter. Have a say before we go.
Yeah, I really, of course, I have to be grateful for all the comments that Brother Gibson offered tonight. But I wonder if I could get a comment from Sister Pitts, because I know that when we touched on this comment, on this topic last week, she shared your view. She wasn't pro-union. They get involved with politics. But I could appreciate the contribution, as I stated from last week, that Brother Gibson, and I like what he said tonight, and drawing those examples within the region. So, Sister Pitts, I'd really like to hear from you before we go in terms of.
She studied constitutional law.
I want to say something. I said something.
Hello. I was putting in the chat what I wanted to say, but because I am not technologically savvy, I have it written here, but I can't see the way I have to press for Senate.
And so what I slash me to pieces.
Read it then. I don't have to eat, but go ahead and read it.
I say, if we agree that the base is the power, we come right back to what has been said over and over again. Consciousness raising and awareness and history need to be taught. Yeah. And so after all the latter thing we say, I note that Mr. Gibson called right wrong to talking about membership. The base is the power, and the base is the power. And that is what we know. That is what we have said over and over.
What the analysis has to be there as to that power that has not been realized, that it is there. How do you stimulate and generate and support the expansion of that power into what it can really be?
That is a question that we ask every week. Every week that is the same thing on the table. How do we get people to understand? How do we raise consciousness? How do we get people to move?
You have to have a strategy.
I've asked a number of people what motivated you, what created the desire for you to want to learn. And the more you ask people, you hear of different ways that inspired people to learn. Now, one of the things where I want to take leadership credit for is that we now have a space every Thursday. So consistency is important. Every Thursday there is a space where we can meet and reason about the rights of workers in Belize. Now, just the fact that there's a space one day when somebody, at least there's a space for them come to, and we could talk about anything about workers in this space, and it's an independent space. And then we hear different things that we may have heard. So when we meet people and start conversations, they're not like we're not do nothing. They want process and take one while. And know that some people don't want to wake up. They like the system just like how it is, and then the gatekeepers. And you just have to know, you have to be unfair, you have to analyze what to deal with and know that that's the way to deal with. Hey, Breda Gibson. Final task before we go.
I think you have to be very systematic. This is an organizational thing, and you have to know who is who. You have to do your talent spotting. You have to build the core, outreach and build the core, because it's not a one-man show. It's not an executive thing. It's something where there's an awareness that can be spread, that is not being regurgitated, but comes from a consciousness of this reality and how to deal with it. So a number of things happening at the same time, which can move ahead of each other because they're basically interdependent. And so when I see at a higher level of organization, senators come together on issues and the NTUC is involved, that shows that things can happen in that direction up to a point, but internally, the strength of the organization is built in terms of its various parts. The PSU at this time is showing itself a certain leadership capacity, a certain awareness, and I understand the membership has increased. It's probably reacting to certain realities of a salary cut and so on. But this is the opportunity to really put some perspective on that. CEO's salary will suddenly become a different class. Make some noise on that, so that can happen, and deal with that. These are things that will illustratively say, look, we got the consciousness and we're moving on it. I'm not suggesting anything, I'm sure, but these are things that are out there. And how you put our government in check, which at this time has tremendous power, which seems to be forgetting where that power came from in terms of why people voted out the UDP. There's a reason for that.
9 minutes after 8, I say Muslim wants to say something. Muslim says something, I make her go. Go ahead.
You woke me up, you see?
Cynthia had her thing lit up just now. You have something else you want to say?
No, nothing else I want to say. I've already said what I
Thanks,
want
Cynthia.
to say.
Thanks, Cynthia.
And all I'm thinking that one has to be strategic, you know, that word. Yep. You know, because we could know what we need to do, but how is it going to be done, and done in a meaningful way and strategically, you know, way. You know, you have to be strategic. You really have to think it out.
Well, when I keep hearing the word strategic, this is a group of people who have similar interests, Belizean workers' rights. So then the people that were in a leadership, wherever it is that you're in a leadership, that they were part, you create your strategies for build consciousness within the groups or wherever on it. This could just be one hub for get information, find out new technologies, skill sets. But I mean, I don't know what else to say.
I think following on that, one of the things, if this group continues to meet, is to, in the 1 hour that is available, zoom in on a specific thing. I think we've been looking at this economic history, and it's a history-oriented type of thing, but it gives you the links from the past to the present. And so perhaps the reading of it and then the sharpening of questions around it that could contribute to strategy going forward. There's one book that I read some time ago that gives a good insight into unionization and how unions were neutralized in the nationalist movement, and how U.S. imperialist penetration brought in a type of union that was precisely to support a capitalist system. And that is Assad Schuman's book on party politics in Belize. If you can get that.
Anyways,
could help. But I'm just saying.
I don't know how I go. Me, you know, them people write book. Listen to me. You could say something and you could write something, and if you not live it, me not got time for you. Like seriously. So, but that's just my 2 cents.
I'm just pointing you to sources of the information.
I agree.
If you want to understand the history of party politics and whole.
I agree with you. Yeah. That would mean the people in this group would have to take the responsibility to read prior to coming, so that when they come, they're talking from an informed position.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
But I totally agree with I agree with that. And I've done it sometimes. I don't know how many people actually have time for read it or have one interest to read it.
You don't have to. You have other ways of acquiring information. You don't have to be on book.
You have to look on YouTube video.
YouTube, I have a lot of information on YouTube.
Yeah, there are different ways.
Oh,
anyways, we're way past time. 11 minutes after 8. Thanks everyone for being here tonight.
All right. Dean.
And then next week I already have one guest schedule. So yeah.
Who is the guest and what is the guest to present on?
Oh my gosh. The guest is Nelma Mortis.
Okay. She co-wrote the
we'll be talking about
youth violence in Belize.
The importance of lifelong learning as workers.
Oh, okay. Is this the same lady who co-wrote with
Yes.
Right,
Bushfire, yes it is. She's an educator.
What's the subject again?
The importance of lifelong learning as Belizean workers.
Maybe I could get off a sharp net even more in terms of this kind of perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I give her the idea of the trend of this, where this has been going since you started it, so that she could have a perspective of it?
I gave her the broad topic and I gave her the leeway. I don't really need people. I allow people. That's why I think we have to allow people sometimes for the creativity flow.
Yeah. But you know, to suppress that. I'm just saying that sometimes you can come into Brad and not having a sense of where this is going. And then you skate wrong as against using very limited time in a very highly productive way.
I don't know how long you listen to it. I think we're good so far with the approach.
No, I shouldn't really be, but I'm just giving my perspective based on.
I appreciate it. I'll keep it in mind for sure. All right then, people. Have one good night.
I will resend the economic history. You might have gone to spam.
Yes, Brother Gibson, please copy in Brother Tate, because normally we source when it go for you. The economic history, that's the economic history of Belize, right?
Yeah.
And then
somebody sent it to me. I don't know. Somebody sent it to me. Was it you, Mr. Gibson?
You get it.
I might have it was
well, I just sent a book review, but he has the whole book digitally.
I see. Yeah.
I don't know why I'm not receiving it, but we'll reason afterwards. Thanks everybody for being here. It was a good show tonight. So thanks for everybody who invited other people. Collective work and responsibility. One love. Thanks, Trish.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.